Okay, so welcome to our November PBIS Leaders Network. We are going to be doing some updates this morning. We are going to be doing kind of a review of our distance learning or reaching student engagement for remote learners today. And we are also going to be talking about equity and the PBIS framework, which is going to be a very relevant topic coming very shortly for those of you who look at your SPP indicators. So that's going to be something that you'll want to hear, I'm sure. So just as a reminder, these are, remember your controls. We want to make sure you're muted unless you're speaking. Video on, your choice. We want to make sure too that we will be utilizing chat. So make sure that your chat window is up. And also make sure that you can open your participants window as well in case you need to use any of those features. So if you do that, your screen could kind of look like this. Your share window is in the middle, your participants window is up in the right corner, chat window in the bottom. But most importantly, we want to make sure we're going to start kind of with a chat. So make sure that you do have your chat window open. So here is a link to our presentation today. It is a bit.ly. We try to do that. So if you guys would like to follow along with the slides, that you're able to do that. So if you go into bit.ly, bit.ly, it's /PBIS Leaders November. So I'll give everybody a second if they would like to get on. I know I would imagine our folks from PBIS team are going to get that into the chat. So get that into the chat. And so I should probably also pull up the chat window and pull it over so I can kind of see what you guys are talking about. And it is now in the chat. So go ahead and click on that if you would like to follow along today. And so we will start with the chat. And since equity is going to be a big part of our discussion this morning, what we would like you to start to just kind of break up the morning and get kind of warmed up is to type in the chat 1 or 2 words that you associate with equity that begins with one of the letters in the word equity. So if you could use a word that begins with E, Q, U, I, T, or Y, and that word would be related to equity. If you could pop that in the chat, that'll get us started for this morning. Quality, thanks, Lee. Equal, love it. Unity, inclusivity, love it. Everyone, absolutely. We're really talking about inclusivity and including everyone these days. Teamwork, and it takes a team to make the dream work. Thanks, Jess. Absolutely. Other words that you guys are thinking of for equity. Oh, justice. Boy, oh boy, we've really been talking about that social justice piece. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for popping those in. And if anybody, oh, that's okay. It's that it doesn't begin with one of the letters, but it's absolutely part of equity. No doubt. It doesn't. Justice is definitely there. The U is the next letter, so we'll say that counts. Okay. Thank you for popping that into the chat. We're going to be talking about all of those things today. Stephanie's got some great information for you today that's related to all the things that you guys popped in the chat. Good morning. Thanks, Shannon. So we just wanted to remind you guys that we have our ST8 Regional Warehouse, and in there will be things that will help you as you're looking at the tiered fidelity inventory and you're collecting evidence. So in there we have some things that the folders they're organized by tier 1, 2, and 3, and those are for your TFI items that we picked kind of from local school districts. We also have some supports in there for PBIS in the virtual classroom. And we have some we're going to keep our student engagement, which you're going to hear about in a minute, our resources for that group in there as well. But I wanted to bring your attention to the fact that we will be housing all the materials from these particular network meetings in that folder as well. So there is a folder that is called PBIS Leaders Network. And so you can find recordings, the PowerPoints or the bit.lys, all in there, or any other resources that we might share with you on these calls. And you guys should have access to that in the Google Classroom. And that was also popped in the chat box as well. So our agenda today is to provide you guys some updated resources. We're going to hear from the Student Engagement Work Group, and we're going to talk about equity. So let's start with our updated resources. For those of you who are not familiar, some of these resources are actually, I was kind of looking at the copyright dates on them. They're a little bit older than I thought. Some of them are going almost on a year of being published. So they're not like fresh, hot off the presses, but we just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware. The first one in particular, we have been, I know I personally have been getting questions, and I know some of the other consultants have been getting questions regarding the report card measure for PBIS implementation. So if you guys have opened your bit.ly and you're on the actual slides, I have just screenshots or just pictures of these documents. But if you click directly on that screenshot, it will take you to the actual document. So I won't do that in the effort to not screw up what we're sharing. But if you click on it, if you have the PowerPoint open, this will take you to this actual document. And I just wanted to remind you guys, we are now starting to see PBIS being reported on the report card. This is an explanation of how they do it. So for last year, 1920, if you look on the bottom of that document, a school in a district will receive a yes for implementation when it had a code of B, C, D, E, or F. That means exploration or adoption, installation, initial implementation, full implementation, or innovation and sustainability. That was last year. So if your school marked a B, C, D, E, or F, you should have received a yes. If any, the district, the way they do the district is if any building in the district does not have a B, C, D, or E, or F, in other words, they scored themselves an A, that would make a no for the whole district. And that's kind of the way that they do this particular measure. For this year, 2021, you'll see your building or your district will get an implementation code of yes if they mark C, installation, D, initial implementation, E, full implementation, or F, innovation and sustainability. You'll get a yes for marking those. If you mark an A or a B, your building will get a no, and your district will get a no if any of the buildings mark an A or a B. So if you continue to look at what it looks like through 2022-23 school year, wow, that's a mouthful. You'll see that they keep scaling back to make sure that you're moving up on those letters of implementation. So that if you have any questions about that, you can click directly on that image and it'll take you to that document. So, if you had a question about why your building scored the way they did or the district did, this really gives you the definition of how that's being done. And I'm seeing that links are being popped into the chat as well. The next thing that we wanted to share with you, and I'm not sure how many of you are aware that ODE did come up with professional development guidance for your LPDCs as far as implementation of training that you need to do to be in compliance with House Bill 318. This particular document shows what that particular professional development could look like. It is suggested, it's not required as far as the time is concerned. So what they suggest is that your PBIS team in your building or your district team should receive about 18 hours of PBIS PD. A lot of you guys here have received that already. Your teams have received that from us. But when it comes to your school, and that is your pre-K through 3, anybody serving any grades pre-K through 3, they really should be getting about 3 hours of professional development in PBIS. If you're not sure how to structure that in your building, this guide will show you what you could do. There are live links that will give you videos that you can use, resources that you can use. So this is something else that is a resource to you. Again, this is not in stone, but the recommendation is that PBIS team gets that 18 hours and then they come back and then train the building for about 3 hours of professional development. Again, that is linked directly on that photo. The other thing that we have been getting questions about is the other provision in House Bill 318 about reduction of suspensions and expulsions for pre-K through 3. You guys are well aware that 18-19 was your baseline year to collect that data. We are now in 2021, and you really should have from that baseline a 50% reduction. If you are not sure, now your EMIS person should know what those suspensions and expulsions, the numbers for those. If you are not sure, and I'm not going to click on it, where it says creating caring communities, that will take you to the ODE page that talks about this provision. And so if you scroll to the bottom of that page, there is some information at the bottom. There's some state data in Excel form. There's data from the 18-19 year for every building. And there's data from 19-20 from every building to see if you are making those cuts. So we know that last year should have been a 25% reduction. We know this year is a 50% reduction. And we know next year will be 100% reduction of those pre-K through 3 suspensions and expulsions. There are some caveats to that policy, including weapons and those kinds of things. But for the most part, for any other type of discipline, that really should be by next year, 100% reduction. And again, that is a live link if you guys want to see those Excel files with the data. And then this last one very briefly is Ohio's commitment to PBIS. And that is just everything I've just talked about with some additional information about House Bill 318. There's some best practices in there. There's some more information about the suspension and expulsion reduction that you might want to look at. This is just another document for your, just for your resource. And as a reminder, if you have not yet registered for the OLAC and PBIS 2020 showcase, registration is available. I know about 2 weeks ago, there were 800 people from the state registered, which is really exciting. We are very lucky in our region, and I'm very proud that we have 3 teams that will be presenting. We have a team from Greenwood Early Learning Center that will be presenting. We have a team from Ravenna, West Main Elementary, and we have Brunswick City Schools that will be presenting this year. I've had the pleasure of seeing some of the West Park presentation, which looks great, and I've already had an opportunity to see the Brunswick presentation, and it was awesome. So we hope you guys join. It is free this year, and it will be remote and virtual. So go ahead and register if you have not done so. And then we did just want to give a shout out to our this year 2020 winning schools. I will not read them for you, but you can see them on the slide. We had a slew of bronze winners from Akron, Barberton, Cuyahoga Falls, Crestwood Field, Medina, Springfield, and Streetsboro. We had tons and tons of buildings. This year, I believe we had a total of 28, I want to say. I counted them, and I think that's what it was, total schools that earned. So congratulations, bronze winning schools. We had several silver winning schools this year. Again, we had Aurora, Barberton, Brunswick, Green, Medina, and Twinsburg recognized this year for silver, and that's tier 1 and tier 2 with Fidelity. And then we had our gold winning. We had, for the first time in a long time, some gold winning schools. That was Memorial and Towsley from Brunswick. So congratulations to those folks. And this year we had 2 district award winners. Barberton and Medina received the district award. And that really is about how many buildings are implementing and using data and having a goal and all those great things. So congratulations, you guys, for all of the hard work that you're doing. And I'm sure before we know it, the application for 2021 will be out, and we'll be working with you guys on doing that this year. So I want to pause. Questions regarding any of the documents shown, any of the policies or resources that we shared with you guys this morning. You can unmute or you can pop those in the chat box. Questions regarding guidance, LPDC guidance, policy, suspension, expulsion, reduction. We'll give a minute for you guys to just process. I'm not really seeing anything in the chat.
I do have a quick question about the report card and as far as PBIS is involved. So how exactly do districts represent whether they're an A, B, C, D, or E, or F? So is that through EMIS or?
Yep, that's exactly. Your EMIS person will at the building and at the district level, well, at the building level, I would assume, because it's an automatic generation for the district's rating. So it is definitely done through EMIS. Yes.
Okay. I just don't want to miss the the opportunity to make sure that we get the right category first.
Absolutely. And I would really highly recommend, Shannon, that was a great question. I would really highly recommend that you guys look at those ratings because, you know, in all honesty, the consultants and all of us PBIS consultants, there were some districts, one in particular that I can think of, that underrepresented what they're doing and gave themselves an A when I know they're further along than that. And we have some folks that are you know, saying that they're E's and F's, where they're sustaining and doing some of those TFI measures and all of that. And I don't really know if they understand what those measures are. So I would highly recommend to everybody, make sure your EMIS person knows, and make sure that the buildings understand what those ratings really mean. And if you have questions about that, please come and see any of your PBIS consultants, myself, Stephanie, Michelle, or Stacy, for further information about that.
Thank you very much.
Question in the chat. I will throw that to either Stacy or Stephanie.
So Jessica, this is talking about actually on your report card, not on your SPED profile. So I'm looking right now, Heidi, in the, I believe it's in district details. So if you go to your report card, whether your district or your school building, I'm looking, Jess, I'm looking for your Ravenna, and you go to the district details. It's like your at a glance page, and you scroll down under your teacher information, educator information. There's a sentence that I'll put into the chat, and it just says, has your district implemented a positive behavior intervention and support framework in compliance with the Ohio Revised Code? And it's a yes or no there.
Right.
On your building report card, not your SPP, on your building report card is where it will show those letters.
And you can access those directly from ODE's webpage. Jess, you don't need a special, anybody could access those. That's public information. So if you go in, I would suggest just going to ODE, and in the search bar, just type in district report card. It'll take you to the page that you can find out how that's been reported. Yeah, and we don't want you guys to get mixed up, because Stephanie in a minute is going to be talking about SPP indicators. And so this is report card. What Stephanie's going to be talking about is going to be SPP indicators. Yeah, so those are great questions.
And on the school page as well, I'm looking, Lee, I pulled up your building. You go to the school overview page, and then it's hidden under school details. So district details and school details, there's a chart with your enrollment, attendance, mobility. Keep scrolling down, and there's one really underwhelming line of PBIS that says, are you doing it, yes or no?
Yeah, we're
all that work into
that. Yeah.
2 or 3 little letters, everybody. But
and I think there's been a particular emphasis on it this year, because there was not much in the report card, because there was no testing. So you guys did not get like indicators for reading and math and all of that. So people are really looking at the PBIS, because that's one that was actually still on the report card this year. So, and will be next year. So, so people are asking questions about it. I think that's why you guys don't have test scores, because the kids didn't take tests. So, okay, so I am going to throw it to my friend and colleague, Stacy, to talk about our student engagement work group.
Thanks, Heidi. So after our first PBIS Leaders Network, there were a handful of you that stayed on the call and really wanted to have a deeper conversation around student engagement, and especially those students right now that are learning remotely or at home, and that you were really struggling with how to engage them, and talking about some of those tier 2 supports and those students, and how do you support families in order to support their children. And so some of you that had stayed on really had some great conversation, and then even met another time and wanted to share resources. And so we thought it would be really helpful if we just gave them a chance to share. And so I'm actually going to ask Lee, I know you're on here, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a few minutes about what this work looks like, and some of the resources and some of the ideas that you all brainstormed together to really try to improve that student engagement for that group of kids that have been hard to reach.
So one of the things that we talked about is I actually punted this to my PBIS team, and they're a cross representation of my entire staff. So one of the things they actually came up with is we wanted to really engage our kids and make it bridge the gap between online and in person. So they have come up with the idea of a citizen of the month across our building, but they also want to do a citizen of the month for online learners and start bringing them in to realize, because what we found is we were getting stuck on the kids who weren't doing what we wanted them to do. And then that's sort of contrary to what the rest of the mission of our school was. So we're trying to bring that. And then obviously I've been in a quarantine for a long time here. And so we want to get that up and running. We'll probably be, December or 1st of January to really get that established with our teachers. That was sort of the delay, is getting it established with our teachers. They've heard about it, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is really get them involved and say, hey, look, this, even though they may have 3 kids that are remote or 4 kids, like really trying to get them involved and not get lost into the kids not doing what we need them to do.
Thanks, Lee. That's so important to make those connections and make sure that the kids that are remote still feel like they're a part of the school and part of that community of learners. So it's a great idea. So thank you for sharing. And I'm sure if any of you are interested in talking with Lee or some of the others that are looking at this a little bit deeper, I'm sure he'd be happy to share with you, because I know this is definitely a passion for you, Lee. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to pass this back to Heidi.
Thanks. I'll add to that also that we did talk a little bit about Attendance Works website. If you guys are not familiar with Attendance Works, it's a great website that talks about student engagement, how to get kids to come to school if you're having absenteeism issues. And I don't think Kara got on the call, but she was really interested in a study that just came out. I think it was Johns Hopkins that did a study regarding using your Remind apps or any kind of reminder apps to really remind parents about the importance of getting to school. There is some indication that they did a study that said if they're using these apps very intentionally with very specific instructions, that it does reduce absenteeism about 20%. So I know Kara was interested in really rethinking about how they use their Remind app, talking about using some of the resources also on the Attendance Works website. So if you're not familiar, those are great resources.
Heidi, if I could add to what you just said there, one of the articles I read about absenteeism too, because at West Main we had a huge problem with it, is sort of that idea of sending out something on like a Sunday or whatever, a Monday, like something special that may go on, like say on a Thursday or whatever, like just sort of throw it out there. Like, you want to make sure that this week on Thursday, you are at school because you are not going to want to miss this, and then just leave it like that. So you sort of build the hype up around that. And obviously you have to deliver with that too.
Right.
But just the idea of hyping that up and, it's just I think it was at attendancework.org. I think it is. They have a lot of great information to read through on that. And attendance definitely was an issue in our building.
Yeah. And I'm afraid that that's going to continue to be an issue as the state we're in right now. It's just, we're going to really have to rethink about how we reach kids, because it's just going to be more and more remote learning, I think, and kids being disconnected. And we don't want that, especially not now. We don't want that. So I think that's a fabulous strategy, Lee. Thank you for sharing. And thank you to the student engagement work group that came together and wanted to brainstorm. If there are ever issues, you guys, that you want to do a smaller group, that kind of worked out kind of nice, because a couple principals got together and shared what they were doing and wanted to try. That was great. If there's ever an issue that comes up that you want to do that, your SST folks are willing to sit down with you and continue those conversations after these meetings. So thank you guys for coming together outside of the network meeting to do that. Any questions for Lee, or any questions regarding attendanceworks.org or that remote learning group. And I'll give a little wait time for that. Thanks again for those folks who came together on that. I thought we had some great conversations and would hope, again, if issues like that come up again, we could maybe do that again.
Heidi, I'll just jump in. I just got a text from Care. She sends her apologies, like everybody else, and she's currently in the school dealing with some issues, but she sends her love, and I know she'd be happy to chat with anyone as well. So
yeah, and I kind of figured,
didn't forget about us, of course.
No, and being a principal, we know that for many of you guys, other things take precedence, and that's it. Actually, that absolutely should take precedence. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw it to Steph, and she's gonna kind of talk about enhancing equity in school discipline and some disproportionality. And I'll throw it to you, Steph.
Hi, everybody. So remember at our last network meeting, we polled the group that was on the last call to see what topic you wanted to discuss. And so equity won, and lucky for you, this has been a really hot spot that we have been throwing some resources and research into as well at the SST. So I'm going to bring you some information, and then following this, Jessica, I know your district is doing a lot with equity as well. So if you are still on the call and able to give us kind of a little update about how this looks in Ravenna, we'd be happy to hear. But as we know, the section that we're going to bring you today is enhancing equity in school discipline. And we know that there is a documented history of inequality with student outcomes. And despite that long history, rates of discipline disproportionality by race and ethnicity have increased over time. This is primarily true for African-American students. For example, in 2012, African-American students were 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. And this disparity really begins at the preschool level. And that research came out of US Department of Ed Office for Civil Rights back in 2014. And what I'm going to bring you today will end with a little look at our state data. And unfortunately, it tells the same story. Not much has changed with these trends in the last decade. So given this challenge and given the request from the network at our last meeting, we've looked into the research and guidance, and we wanted to give you guys some information about how to develop policies that are compatible with PBIS that will enhance equitable outcomes for all of your students in your schools. So the next slide here will give you a link to one of the guidance documents that we really found is helpful and practical. And this is called Key Elements of Policies to Address Discipline Disproportionality. And this is a guide for either district and school teams. So the link is provided for you there. And what we're going to do is highlight a couple of key points for you. So starting with the policies and procedures, as we know, Heidi, next slide. It's important not to assume that policies themselves will produce desired outcomes. It'd be great if we put something on paper, but as we've trained all of you for PBIS, expectation by lamination and by osmosis doesn't really work. So there are specific ways in which policies can set the stage for change. But if your district has a current equity policy, or if you're in the process of drafting one, this slide gives you a couple of do's and don'ts. And we really like this. So your policies and procedures can be most effective if they set clear priorities, if they can reduce the effects of explicit bias, if you could enable implementation of specific interventions, and if you can reduce discriminatory practices. And we're going to look at a couple of those. What we liked even more than that could be effective, as our PBIS team was really diving into these and researching, is how they could not be ineffective. We know a lot of districts and school buildings individually are doing this equity work, but that's not effective if nobody knows about that work or if nobody knows about those policies. Other ways that those can be ineffective is if they don't change the practice, if we don't really get from that jump from your theory and practice to the application of it at a school level, and if there's not accountability measures tied into that. So your policies should really strive to minimize inequitable practices, and doing so really set forth a motion for ongoing assessment and continuous improvement. We know that the trends of this work did not come easily and come overnight, and we don't expect the change to do that. But there are some key elements that were outlined in that policy guidance that we've given you to make this a little bit more tangible. So on the next slide, we have a list of the key elements. And as we think about the district policies or procedures, or again, you can even do this at a school building if your district isn't ready to tackle it, but you see the need in your school building. These are key elements that are suggested in the research to include. So I'm going to give you a minute now just to review these on the slide, and then we're going to zoom into a couple of them specifically. So the first one that we're going to look at is a specific commitment to equity. And we wanted to draw your attention to this one. Now, the 3 slides that we have next will, on the left column, you're going to see what the research has listed as critical features of these elements. And the right column, which we really like, is a specific example of how this could look into practice. So note here the specificity of language that they're using. They're expressing their commitment to equity. And we liked in this example how they're calling out specific identity markers, such as race, ethnicity, culture, religion, abilities. And so we know that there are various reasons, and we know this from our LRE work and our special education work, that there are certain groups that traditionally are marginalized in school districts. And so what this example shows is the specificity of language to draw attention to those, which will therefore kind of be the catalyst for your accountability measures moving forward. The next one we're going to highlight should look very familiar to you. This one is a focus on implementing positive and proactive behavior supports. So note in this example that the focus here is really on ongoing instruction and the reinforcement of appropriate social and behavior interactions. And we pulled this language again. Any of you that have been through our PBIS trainings or our coaching, we know that these aspects really align directly with aspects of explicit teaching and the acknowledgement systems that we bring forth in PBIS. And so they are saying that these things, explicit teaching, can help really solve or lessen that gap of inequitable outcomes for your students. The last one we will highlight is the graduated discipline systems with instructional alternatives to exclusion. That's a mouthful, but we wanted to really focus on this one because this is directly highlighted to Heidi's earlier review. Remember, there was that Ohio guidance on the reduction of suspensions and expulsions for grades pre-K through 3. And so this is really calling for a list of instructional responses to student behavior. And it's calling for a connection to investigating that how the academic supports that kids need are really contributing to behavior events. So a lot of you, if I look on the squares and the names I see on the Zoom call, have worked with us in years prior about really dissecting why behaviors are happening and why student behavior problems are existing. Is it a direct connection to an academic deficit? Or are the behaviors impeding that academic? So this is really calling for, we have to teach appropriate replacement behaviors, and we also have to factor in the wide range of what's going on with the kid. So those of you that are involved in multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, looking at that connection between the behavior side of things and the academic side of things, this is really highlighting that as well. The other reason we chose to highlight this element is because this relates to a big change that we're going to see in special education in the state of Ohio. And so those of you special ed directors, I see a couple of you on the call. I'm sorry I'm going into DisPro now, but what we wanted to do is give everybody on the call a really high level, because some of our principals don't know that this change is coming. And as PBIS representatives, either as a building administrator doing PBIS in your buildings, or as team members, you may be called in to sit on some of these work with self-review summary reports or some of the corrective action that may be coming to your district. So what we're going to do is give you guys a little look on our next slide about the changes that the state are rolling out for disproportionality. So we're going to shift a little bit, and you'll notice that the slide format changes. And the reason why it changes is because these slides were released by ODE's Office for Exceptional Children. And so this is content directly from them. And what I want to make everyone aware of on this call is that every year, similar to the school and district report cards that we did look at, your district gets a report card specific to special education. And so this is what Jessica was alluding to in the chat earlier of, am I looking at SPP or am I looking at report cards? So every district gets a special education report card, and they call that the special education profile. And what I want you to look at is that right column, because there are a lot of different indicators that are coming out in that special education profile or report card, and they relate to both compliance and performance measures. So we won't get into all that today, but they are adding this year for the first time a measure relating to discipline. And so if you look at that right column and you look at everything in blue, those are the changes that are coming this year. And it's going to be released in a couple of weeks. They're slating it for early December. So I won't go into details unless you want to call and chat with me about this, which I'm really encouraging because I'm really into this lately. So call me and chat about it. But they are looking at all of those discipline factors for students with disabilities starting at age 3. So they are now looking at out-of-school suspensions and expulsions of days 10 or fewer, of more than 10 days, which was always the case. They're looking at in-school suspensions of 10 days or fewer, in-school suspensions of more than 10 days, and total disciplinary removals. And each state, because this is an IDEA requirement, are going to look at those discipline categories for different racial and ethnic groups that you'll see on the next slide. So we just listed for each of these those categories. Now they're going to do calculations for each of these race ethnic groups, again, to see if anything stands out at a disproportionate level. So the reason, or one of the big reasons for this change, is due to the data trends that we've seen. And our next slide is looking at national and racial ethnic disparities in discipline. Again, that's a mouthful. But looking at these disciplinary removals per 100 students provides a way to compare these discipline events across racial groups, which is what you're seeing here. The blue square there, I know it's a little small, hopefully you're looking at your bit.ly. Those cover, the data that covers here, all types of discipline events that are listed in that blue box. So those are including in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and expulsions. And the takeaway here is that Black students far exceed any other racial group, with 65 removals per 100 students. And you see it kind of that goes down from there. So in Ohio, unfortunately, we mirror that national data in terms of racial disparities for Black students. So on the next slide, we look at the most recent data that we have, and it's saying that in Ohio, educators are more than 2 times as likely to remove Black students for discipline and 3 times as likely to expel Black students. So Black students make up only 15% of our enrollment, but 44% out of all school suspensions. So the goal here, both with the guidance that we've provided and with the work that is going to be coming out for special education, is to promote equity by identifying and addressing disproportionality as we see it in special education. Okay, so with the next slide is kind of the overall goal that ODE is putting forth this year and the challenge for our school districts. So with that national and state data in mind, we understand why those regulations are revised. And today we gave you really high level. Sherry, Jessica, Justin, all of you have heard these updates at Special Education Forum. So you know that there's much more to the story that we could tell. But ultimately, the purpose of this change is to help ensure that states are really appropriately identifying students and addressing their discipline for more equitable outcomes for all of your students. Okay, so as we think about equity within the PBIS framework, we wanted to give you kind of that whole picture of what's going on in the state of Ohio, and also a ton of resources to address this need if you see it in your schools and districts. So the slide here are 5 of our favorites. And I see Michelle in there, so hopefully you're popping those into the chats, which I appreciate. The first one is, and we're not going to go into them, but I want to tell you what they are and hopefully why you would go there. The first one is an overview of George Sugai, which is a name probably familiar to you with PBIS work, about learning history. Heidi adores George Sugai. So if you want to talk Dispro, call me. If you want to talk about George Sugai's learning history, call Heidi. The reason why this is important is here at SST8, several of our PBIS consultants, we've started an equity work group, and we've partnered with the Great Lakes Equity Center to really understand the research and the resources available. So if your districts need some support, we're ready to provide that. And what we've learned pretty loud and clear, that was also echoed at the National PBIS virtual forum this year, is that starting with data is tricky. We thought that that was the right course because data speaks very loudly. But what the researchers are really telling us is to start with ourselves and our own learning history to really highlight some implicit bias areas that are coming to light. And so that little video by George Sugai is about 11 minutes in length, and it goes through his own learning history and challenges us to think about what events have been key markers in our life that will be affecting how we interact with people, especially students, especially in the area of discipline. The next link there is a video from Kent McIntosh, another big researcher in this field. Heidi also adores Kent McIntosh. And he has a little video about equity in school discipline that highlights that as well, how you can look at your data, but also how to work with that within the PBIS framework for more equitable outcomes. The third link there is a website for Ohio's disproportionality. So if you're curious about that or a little freaked out, there is tons of information that has been released in the last month about Ohio's threshold for how they're measuring significant disproportionality, how that's calculated through EMIS, and some of the factors related to that. There is also a technical document and guidance for fiscal resources, because if your district has a finding for significant disproportionality, which hopefully you don't, but if you do, there is a redirection of IDA funds attached to that. So there's lots of information on that website if you're curious. The bottom 2 are really interesting from PBIS apps.org. The one is a cultural responsiveness field guide. And what that does is if you're looking at embedding more culturally responsive practices into your existing PBIS framework, they have taken the 15 elements of the tiered fidelity inventory and done an overlay of sorts of culturally responsive practices to go with that. So yes, you have a PBIS team, but is your PBIS team representative of the community that you support, for example? So that is a really nice companion to the work that is really familiar to all of you on the call that could kind of give a different layer. And Heidi, I don't know if you want to jump in. I know you've been researching this, and
and I really like it for a few reasons. One is that it completely aligns with the TFI, which you know is our measure for adult implementation for fidelity of the framework. But the other things I like about it are, number one, it gives you what this should look like and what this doesn't look like. So examples and non-examples for each item. And then at the end, there are activities, there are examples, pictures, other resources beyond just the 15 items in the TFI that can really get you to think about what should your posters look like? What should your language look like to really be culturally responsive? So I think this particular resource, particularly if you are using the TFI as a measure, is a great accompaniment to that, because it gives you a lot of great considerations to make sure, you'll talk to people who will say, if we are not doing PBIS culturally responsively, we're really not doing PBIS. So it's really a nice guide for to accompany that, to accompany the TFI. And I would highly recommend also that you watch the George Sugai video. It really does. It's really a great video. I would highly recommend that.
See, I told you guys she loves George Sugai. We weren't even talking about it. She had to go back to it. Do you see that? The final one is using discipline data to address disproportionality. This one's a really quick, down and dirty kind of tip sheet for how to start dissecting your own data to look to see if you have things over the recommended risk ratio. I will say that if your district or building is really familiar with the Ohio continuous improvement process and the 5-step process, it's going to look really familiar to you. Same process, a little bit different terminology, but that one should be a good resource for you as well. So I know we've provided you with a lot, and we always struggle with how much content do we give you in this little amount of time to be a little teaser to have you guys dive into the resources. But of everything we've poured into, we really love these the best. And I will also say I'm really proud of our SST and an equity work group that we've kind of formed on the side. We have currently been in the process of developing a lot more PD on demands that are going to be coming forth should you have a finding for discipline disproportionality. So don't freak out too much. At this point, I want to pause to both ask questions and I want to give Jessica a couple minutes, if you don't mind. I think Heidi reached out to you, Jess. We're really proud of and impressed with the work that Ravenna is doing with your equity task force, I think is the name of it. So at this time, Jess, if you're still on the call, if you don't mind, just giving a little highlight of what that is and where your district is with this work.
Sure. Our superintendent has formed an equity and inclusion task force within the district, and that is comprised of community members, different teachers within the buildings, different staff members to kind of come together on a regular basis and just discuss some of those topics. We were slated to have a speaker coming from Kent State to speak of equity and inclusion to the entire staff, but unfortunately, due to the order from the president, we were not able to do that. But we are hopeful now that we will be able to do that for possibly our February PD. But there are a lot of really good discussions going on, and I think it's going to tie in nicely with PBIS as far as what we're already doing. So I'm very, proud of our district for just starting those conversations, because they're not always easy to have, especially when we have, some community members that are very passionate, and sometimes passion can be misconstrued as aggression or anger, but it's really just, passion about the cause. And so really, I'm proud to be a part of a district that is taking that on and having those conversations.
Thanks, Jess. The other thing, as you guys are thinking, if there are questions for Jess or for the group as a whole, I just wanted to throw to Stacy or Michelle about, when we're looking at some of this data, it is really also including our youngest learners, which is kind of a switch as well. I don't know if you guys want to throw anything else out there to the group regarding how this is being captured starting at age 3, or any of those early learning considerations that you might want to add to the discussion as well.
Sure. So when we're talking about disproportionality, if you've come through PBIS with the early learning focus, something that was quite shocking is the rates of disproportionality in children being suspended or expelled from the preschool setting was actually higher than that at high school. And every time we share that, people are just absolutely shocked. But it's just, we want to make sure that it's, as Heidi said, this is an issue from preschool all the way through, that it isn't something that just starts at a certain grade or certain level. So again, that is something that as we've dug more into the research, I know Stephanie's actually made some slides and things for a different, on that equity side of things that we've been working on, but just really looking at how this impacts everyone in all ages.
So at this time, if you want to unmute or pop in the chat, if there's any questions regarding the equity information that Steph presented Any questions about the resources or documents from ODE that I kind of went over at the beginning? Questions for Jess for their equity and inclusion task force, or even questions for Lee regarding their separate work group for student engagement. We'll give you guys a minute to either unmute your mic or pop in the chat if there's any questions from things that we've talked about today.
I also would just be interested if there are other districts that have an equity task force or something similar in your district that you already are starting to address this. We would be interested to know who's doing that, what that work looks like. So if you'd be willing to share, because I know there's more than just Ravenna addressing this.
Right.
I was given a resource the other night that I started watching. It's actually on Amazon Prime for free. It's a book called The Color of Compromise. And just sort of and it's based off the church's view of systematic racism. And like in our equity task force, we're reading the book White Fragility. And it's a pretty, at least the first couple of chapters are pretty like in your face, like this is real. But when you start researching it and looking at other alternatives, there's a lot of examples of stuff, policies that are going on, and then you start seeing how things play out in schools. You're like, wow, this is pretty amazing and pretty deep stuff. Like you can't really approach it with a closed mind. You have to really want to read it, and it starts to make you question, like, why do we do that? But in schools, they talk about this idea of deficit mindset. And because a kiddo is, of a certain race or, socioeconomic status or whatever, that's just what they do. If we say our kids are poor, oh, that's just what they do. And they said trying to erase that deficit mindset in the school is pretty challenging to do. But that color compromise, it's like on a 15 to 20 minute little segments you can watch, but the White Fragility, we're in the middle of reading that now, and it's pretty interesting stuff.
And I think our equity team, thanks Lee for sharing that. I think our equity team would agree. We are beginning to do exploration of the topic, and it's difficult and it's uncomfortable. And you just have to be willing to be able, as Lee said, to kind of look at it. And I think the one thing that I'm learning, and anybody else on the team who might feel the same or maybe don't feel the same, really we have to look at the systems that we have in place, because it's not necessarily an individual, not that people aren't biased or whatever, but it's the systems that we have in place that we really need to look at on how we do things. And I think Lee kind of alluded to that in what he's reading and what he's researching. And we really have to look at the way our systems are set up, because it in many, many cases, it's not equitable for all kids. So I think that's kind of where we have to start. And I think we have to be okay with being uncomfortable. And I think we have to be okay with being okay with everybody being in a safe space to be able to share things that might not be popular with everybody. Or I think we have to get to that point, or else the work isn't going to move forward. So Steph or Stacy, I don't know if I know we all sit on that group. I don't know if you guys would want to add anything to that, but I think that's kind of where I am personally. I'll speak for myself as far as starting this work. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, and I'm not hearing it. Does anybody else have an equity or inclusionary type task force in their district that they would like to share before we kind of wrap up? I know Ravenna's done a lot of work. I don't know if there's anybody else that would like to share what they might be doing in their district that might be helpful for somebody else. And you might not, and that's okay. I'm just gonna give a second of wait time here. Okay, well, as we wrap up today, we want to remind you that our next Leaders Network, PBIS Leaders, I almost called it Literacy Leaders because I go to those meetings too. I stole the name actually. Our next PBIS Leaders Network is January 21st, 2021. It will be from 9 to 10 a.m. And we're going to be talking about family and community engagement and looking at how you can really leverage your PBIS framework to boost and include family and community engagement in your school. And there's a lot of great resources to do that. I think the other thing that we're learning about the equity work as well is that family and community engagement and voice has to really be part of the conversation. So all of these things, although we're taking these topics kind of separately, they're all very integrated and they're very connected. So we're going to be talking specifically next time about family and community engagement. And I apologize to those of you for sending the last minute link. I'm still learning about Zoom, and I wasn't sure if the original link that we had for our first network meeting was still going to work. So I wanted to make a fresh link. So that's why you guys got that. And I apologize if anybody was messed up by that or screwed up by that. I'm sorry about that. Right now, if you register, it's going to give you that original link, and I'm going to test it out to make sure it works. If it doesn't work, I'm going to just send out a fresh link for probably each next session that we have. I'm not still learning the ins and outs of Zoom, so I apologize for that. So that kind of concludes our network meeting for this month. Any last questions, concerns, comments, or for the good of the group? Then I would like to go ahead and thank Jessica Haynes for sharing, Lee Smith for sharing today, and anyone else who shared, our consultants. Thank you for sharing. And we will see you, hopefully, maybe we'll see you before January 21st on some other meeting, but for this particular group, we'll see you again in the new year. Happy Thanksgiving, and we hope you enjoy your holidays. Thanks, guys.